November 24, 1944, Northfield, Tinian, and Elifield, Saipan. The 21st Bomber Command sends out 111 Boeing B-29 superfortresses toward the main islands of Japan. Brigadier General Haywood Hansell leads the American Strategic Bombing Force from his main base on Guam. The Silver Bombers were carrying 277 tons of bombs, headed for the Nakajima Aircraft Company's Musashino engine factory on the edge of Tokyo. What Japanese fighter pilots find out this morning will completely change what they knew about fighting in the air. It will show a technology difference that no amount of bravery or willpower could close. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if stories of heroes appearing in the darkest hour thrill you, then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. Captain Tatsuo. Yamada fixes his oxygen mask in the pilot's seat of his Kawasaki K-61. High-end at Chofu Airfield near Tokyo. The morning meeting stressed the importance of stopping enemy bombers by getting as high above them as possible. Secret reports pointed to large four-engine bombers flying from newly taken bases in the Mariana Islands at heights never seen before. Yamada puts his name down for the high-altitude stopping mission, which promised a tough fight against a foe whose abilities were mostly a mystery. His plane was armed with 4 12.7mm machine guns and 2 20mm cannons, weapons made for fighting at normal heights where Japanese fighters did very well. The problem of height came from Japan's little experience with American heavy bombers in China earlier in 1944. Those B-24 Liberators and older B-17 Flying Fortresses flew at heights Japanese fighters could get to, usually between 20,000 and 25,000 feet. Major Takeshi Noda had created special climbing methods based on those fights, focusing on gaining height before the battle rather than climbing during it. A pilot already at a great height had energy benefits that could beat defensive guns. But the morning's secret reports hinted these new bombers flew much higher than anything seen before. The 21st Bomber Command was America's strongest Pacific strategic force since the Doolittle Raid of 1942. The command would in time grow to over 1,000. Planes flying from 5 large airfields across Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, with pressurized cabins made just for operations at very high altitudes over huge Pacific distances. This building idea was completely different from earlier American bombers. The B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator had cabins without air pressure that needed heavy flight suits and oxygen masks, which held their useful flying ceiling to around 25,000 feet. American makers put height ability first in the B-29, taking on the complicated design in return for a safe zone above the range of enemy fighters. The air pressure system let crews work in their shirt sleeves at heights where crews in planes without it would have a hard time with cold and lack of oxygen. Yamada's group includes K-61, Hien from the 244th Sentai and Nakajima K-44, Shoki interceptors from the 47th Sentai, climbing with all their might from many airfields around Tokyo at the fastest possible speed. The Japanese pilots see vapor trails forming at a very great height as the American groups come in from the southeast. Radar men at the Chiba Detection Station spot the incoming group at 27,000 to 31,000 feet, changing their height as they fly through different weather. Ground controllers guide the defending fighters toward the approaching danger, but the climbing planes struggle to even get to 25,000 feet before the bombers are over the target. The technology difference is clear right away as the two sides try to fight for the first time. Yamada is flying a plane made in 1941 for fighting at middle heights against Chinese and early Pacific War enemies. His K-61 weighs 7,650 pounds with a 1,175 horsepower Kawasaki A40 liquid-cooled engine that gives it a top speed of 368 mph at 16,400 feet. While the official papers say it can fly as high as 36,000 feet, its real fighting ability gets much worse above 28,000 feet. The engine loses power quickly in the thin air, while the controls become more and more slow to respond. Self-sealing fuel tanks and pilot armor were added after fighting experience, adding weight that made its high-altitude ability even worse. The K-44 interceptors from the 47th Sentai try to get to the bomber group, which is flying between 27,000 and 30,000 feet high depending on the weather. These fighters, made just for high-altitude stopping with better climb speeds, fight hard in the thin air. Engines get too hot while making only a small part of their sea-level power, and pilots gasp for air through poor oxygen systems that were made for shorter fights at lower heights. The interceptors get to 28,000 feet before most start to stall, still thousands of feet below many of the bombers. The few fighters that do get high enough don't have the energy for a long fight. Control surfaces hardly work in the thin air while engines are pushed past their limits. The B-29s keep their group shape at their flying height. Crews work in comfort in cabins with air pressure without the heavy flight suits or awkward oxygen masks that made earlier bomber flights hard. Captain Robert Morgan leads the main superfortress, Dauntless Dottie, as navigator Captain Theodore Van Kirk finds the main target through the Norden bomb site. The bomber's 4 Wright R-3350 engines make 2,200 horsepower each, keeping a true airspeed of over 300 mph at their flying height, even in the thin air. Turbo superchargers squeeze the thin air, keeping engine power going where regular engines would stop. The pressurized parts of the plane are linked by a tunnel over the bomb bays, letting the crew move around without altitude suits. This design allows for long flights at heights that were once impossible for warplanes. The central fire control system manages the defensive guns through analog computers, following several targets at once, while gunners work from comfortable spots. Yamada pushes his K-61 to its highest possible point, the airspeed dial showing just 180 mph, as the fighter struggles in the thin air near 30,000 feet. His training before the war never prepared him for fighting at such heights. The mission plan stressed attacking from above using diving runs to keep up energy, but getting into a spot above the bombers turns out to be impossible. The Japanese strategy, created for fighting B-17s and B-24s without escorts at medium heights, is completely useless. The high end stays at 30,000 feet for just a few seconds before stalling, which makes it drop 3,000 feet to recover. Several tries get the same results as engine temperature dials go past the red line and oil pressure goes up and down dangerously. Yamada sees the bomber vapor trails passing above him, their defensive guns following his fighter but not shooting because of the great distance. The height gap stops any real fighting despite the desperate Japanese efforts and early notice of the raid. That morning, only 40 Japanese fighters were able to make any attacks on the bomber group, with most only getting one firing run before losing energy. Machine gun bullets fired in climbing attacks lose speed very quickly in the thin air, many not reaching their targets. The few fighters that get to a good firing spot don't have enough energy for a long fight, only managing short bursts before stalling and falling away. Anti-aircraft shells burst thousands of feet below the bombers, even with the guns set to their highest angle. The biggest Japanese anti-aircraft guns could in theory get to 30,000 feet, but being accurate at such heights is almost impossible. The November 24th raid is the first large B-29 attack on Tokyo since the symbolic Doolittle raid 31 months before. The group stays on its path toward the Nakajima Aircraft Company's Musashino engine plant, Japan's most vital airplane engine factory. Chief Bombardier Lieutenant Coleman drops his bombs on cue, and other planes drop theirs in order from their different heights. Because of strong jet stream winds found at that height, reaching over 200 mph, only 24 planes hit the main target, with others bombing secondary targets or missing completely. Still, the effect on people's minds is huge. The bombs fall from a height never seen before while Japanese fighters fly around helplessly below, not able to reach the attackers. People on the ground watch vapor trails crossing Tokyo's sky at a height they couldn't have imagined, far out of reach of the defending fighters. Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka manages fighter operations from sector control, getting upset reports from the interceptor groups. Pilots say their engines are failing, controls are not working, and they can't stay at the height needed to stop the bombers. The bombers fly through Japanese airspace, losing only one plane to a ramming attack by a damaged fighter in a desperate suicidal act. The defending pilots use up their fuel in useless climbing efforts, most going back to base without ever getting into shooting range. The display of better technology shocks both the Japanese military leaders and the pilots. The 21st Bomber Command finishes its first Tokyo mission with very little damage from defenses, although mechanical problems make several B-29s turn back or land in the Pacific. Japanese fighters claim only one sure victory by ramming, while bomber gunners claim 5 Japanese fighters were shot down. The safe zone at that height goes against every Japanese idea based on stopping lower-flying bombers from bases in China. This failure in operations comes from a basic misunderstanding of American bomber abilities and the groundbreaking nature of the B-29's design. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda watches B-29 operations from Naval Headquarters, studying the Army fighter failures with increasing worry. December 3, 1944 sees another focused B-29 attack on Tokyo with 86 planes aimed at the same Musashino plant. The Japanese way of fighting changes based on what they learned in November. Captain Teruhiko Kobayashi of the elite 244th Sentai tries new methods, getting his fighters to their top height before the bombers get there, hoping to dive on them with an energy advantage. But even starting from the best spot, the K-61s cannot get to the bombers' height. The group has specially changed interceptors with less armor, no radios, and very little ammunition to be lighter. These stripped-down fighters get a little higher, but still can't reach a good fighting height. Lieutenant Saburo Hayashi commands a special ramming unit called the Hagakure Tai, made of volunteer pilots ready to give up their lives. The unit's planes are stripped of all unneeded weight, including most guns and armor, carrying just enough fuel for a one-way trip to get as high as possible. The changed K-61 fighters climb toward the incoming group with emergency power on, knowing it will surely damage the engines. Manifold pressure goes over the maker's limits, while cylinder head temperatures get close to the breaking point. Pilots breathe pure oxygen for 30 minutes before taking off, but the poor oxygen system still causes signs of oxygen starvation during the extreme height attempts. Most fighters stall around 30,000 feet, still below a good fighting height. Sergeant Masao Itagaki gets to 31,500 feet in his lightened K-61 before trying to ram a B-29 that has fallen behind. The bomber's defensive guns fire without stopping as the fighter comes up from below in a steep climb. Many .50 caliber bullets hit the K-61, but Itagaki keeps on his collision path. At the very last second, his fighter loses energy, stalling 500 feet below the target before going into a spin he can't control. The pilot gets the plane back at 20,000 feet, but it is too damaged and low on fuel to try another climb. The ramming attacks have some success now and then when bombers come down because of mechanical troubles, but they can't stop the high-altitude danger in a regular way. Through December 1944, B-29 losses stay very low while Japanese cities start to take strategic damage. The defending pilots feel a deep disappointment watching their country being attacked while they are powerless to do anything about it. The old samurai warrior spirit means nothing against the technology walls that keep them from fighting. Pilots tell of feeling helpless and ashamed that they can't protect Japan, even though they are willing to give up their lives. Major General Curtis LeMay takes over the 21st Bomber Command in January 1945, looking at how well the high-altitude daylight raids are working with his usual focus. The first missions have poor accuracy because of the jet stream winds found at bombing height, sometimes blowing at over 250 mph. These winds, not known before the B-29 flights, push bombers quickly over their targets, making accurate bombing almost impossible. Flying the right course is hard. Bombs drift for miles from where they were aimed, no matter how skilled the bombardier, and clouds often hide the targets in the winter, forcing them to use radar for bombing with very little precision. All these things together mean that less than 10% of the bombs hit their intended targets. LeMay is under pressure from Washington to get better results. After studying the situation, he makes a groundbreaking change in March 1945, ordering low-altitude night attacks with firebombs against city areas. This choice completely changes the air war over Japan. B-29s are stripped of their defensive guns except for the tail guns and carry the most firebombs they can. The drop in height from 30,000 feet to 5,000, 9,000 feet gets rid of the jet stream problem while putting the bombers in range of Japanese defenses. This change in tactics means Japanese fighters can now get to a good stopping height, which completely changes how the fights happen. March 9, 1945, is the day of Operation Meeting House, the terrible Tokyo firebombing mission that changed the ideas of strategic bombing. The attack group of 334 B-29s comes in at 5,000 to 9,000 feet, finally low enough for all types of Japanese fighters to reach. The darkness and the sudden change in tactics at first confused the Japanese defenses. Lieutenant Yoshio Mita scrambles in his Nakajima Ki-44 from Matsudo Airfield, at last able to get to the bomber's height with no trouble. But fighting at night brings a whole new set of problems. Without radar on the planes or good ground control, Japanese fighters have a hard time finding targets in the dark. Searchlights light up single bombers, while anti-aircraft guns fire at very close range for the first time. Ki-44s and K-61s make desperate single attacks without radio help or group support. Mita gets in several firing runs against B-29s, seeing hits on engine covers and bodies. A few bombers trail flames and lose height, but most keep going to their targets even with damage. The super fortresses show they are amazingly tough, taking a huge amount of punishment while heading to their targets. Remote-controlled turrets fire on attacking fighters with radar-guided guns in the dark, which turns out to be surprisingly effective. Japanese pilots trained for daylight fighting have a hard time with night fighting methods. The firebomb attack creates a huge fire that burns up 16 square miles of Tokyo, killing around 100,000 people in the deadliest air raid in history. Japanese fighters claim 14 B-29s were shot down, the highest number of the war, but they can't stop the terrible damage to the capital city. The low height allows them to stop the bombers, but the huge number of bombers, the darkness, and the surprise change in tactics limit how well the defenses work. The success of the firebombing proves LeMay's risk was right, setting a model for future raids. The change in tactics makes the Japanese high-altitude interceptor development programs useless, as they had been frantically looking for ways to solve the height problem. Money and effort put into high-altitude engine work and air pressure research become pointless overnight. Imperial Navy Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi flies the new Mitsubishi J-2M Raiden interceptor during B-29 raids over Nagoya in early 1945. The Raiden's supercharged Kasei engine lets it fly at a 36,000-foot ceiling, which should be high enough to fight B-29s. But fighting at such a great height is nearly impossible, even when fighters can get that high. The controls barely work, and the engine makes very little power even with the supercharger. Pilots say they can't stay on a chase path or lead their targets well in the thin air, even when they get to the bomber's height. The fighters don't have the ability for a good fight. The Raiden needs to be in the perfect spot before the bombers arrive to even try one firing run. A climbing chase from below is impossible once the bombers have passed over. Many pilots have their oxygen systems fail, which makes them confused or pass out at that height. The few successful interceptions happen against damaged planes that have dropped out of the group, not healthy bombers at their flying height. April 1945 sees coordinated kamikaze attacks on B-29 groups. As regular interception keeps failing, the Japanese military officially creates special attack units just to target B-29s. Corporal Koshi Ogawa successfully rams the B-29 torch over Kawasaki on April 12th. Both planes are destroyed in the crash. This same day is witness to one of the most famous acts of bravery in B-29 operations. Staff Sergeant Henry Irwin gets the Medal of Honor when a phosphorus flare goes off too early in his plane. The device burns through Irwin's face and body, destroying his nose and blinding him. Despite terrible injuries, Irwin carries the burning device through the bomber to the cockpit window, saving 11 crew members. His sacrifice shows the bravery on both sides, despite the technology difference. Special attack units are formed at many bases with pilots volunteering for missions where they know they will die against the silver bombers. These ramming attacks have little success, destroying maybe 10 B-29s in the whole war, a very small part of the bomber force. The mental effect on American crews is bigger than the tactical results, knowing that enemy pilots will crash into their planes on purpose. Yet even successful ramming attacks can't really affect how well the bombing campaign works. The central fire control system on B-29s proves to be very good against Japanese fighters, even with fewer gun positions than the B-17s. Computer-controlled turrets follow several targets at once, while gunners work from pressurized parts of the plane instead of open spots. Japanese pilots report that the defensive fire is amazingly accurate, with the automatic system keeping on target even when they try to dodge. The remote control system lets the guns keep working even if one gun position is damaged. Unlike earlier bombers where a hurt gunner meant a defenseless area, this technology advantage adds to the safety of height when bombers fly at their top ceiling. The arrival of P-51 Mustang escorts from Iwo Jima in April 1945 changes the situation even more. These long-range fighters gain control of the air over Japan, making daylight B-29 flights even safer. Japanese interceptors now have to deal with aggressive escort fighters while trying to attack the bombers. The few fighters that get through the escort screen find themselves being chased while trying to get into position for a bomber attack. Captain Yasuhiko Kuroe leads the 64th Sentai, which has new Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate fighters, Japan's most advanced working fighter. The Ki-84 performs better at high altitude than earlier types, with a service ceiling of 34,450 feet in perfect conditions. The highest it can fly for a long time is about 32,000 feet with less armament and a small amount of fuel. Pilots say it performs well up to 28,000 feet before the power drops off sharply. The Heie-45 engine, though strong at middle heights, doesn't have a good supercharger for extreme heights. Ki-84s try to stop mining missions where B-29s fly at lower heights over water, getting several victories against bombers below 20,000 feet. These successes show what the fighter can do when the height disadvantage is gone. But higher altitude daylight missions are still mostly safe from interception, even with the Ki-84 improvements. The performance gap stays throughout the rest of the fighting, with most Ki-84 flights failing to get to a fighting height. June 1945 sees the Kawasaki Ki-100, a fighter made from Ki-61 airframes with radial engines, which replaced the troublesome liquid-cooled engines. The change makes it much more reliable but lowers its high-altitude ability compared to the inline engine versions. Ki-100s do very well against American fighters at middle altitudes, being very nimble and well-liked by pilots, but the radial engine is not good at high altitudes, limiting its ceiling to around 32,000 feet. Pilots report better handling, but not enough height performance for B-29 interception. The Ki-100 is Japan's best working fighter, but it comes too late and not in enough numbers. The Japanese aircraft industry makes several special, high-altitude interceptor models throughout 1945. The Mitsubishi Ki-83 twin-engine fighter promises great altitude performance with turbo-supercharged engines. The Kawasaki Ki-102 heavy fighter carries powerful guns just for destroying bombers. Development programs are hurt by shortages of materials, especially high-quality aluminum and special alloys needed for superchargers. Manufacturing problems stop them from being used in battle before the war ends, with most models destroyed in bombing raids. B-29 attacks regularly destroy aircraft factories and engine plants, taking away their ability to produce. The Akashi engine works, which made the Ha-40 engine for Ki-61 fighters, burns down in January 1945. The technology gap gets wider as American improvements move faster than Japanese development, with each month bringing better B-29 abilities while Japanese industry falls apart. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tibbets leads special training for delivering the atomic bomb, using the B-29's height ability. The silver plate B-29s have all their defensive guns removed except for the tail guns, letting them fly even higher. These changes make sure the nuclear delivery planes are completely safe from being stopped. August 6, 1945, brings the final show of the safety of height. When the Enola Gay gets near Hiroshima at 31,600 feet, Japanese fighters take off from nearby bases but can't get to the single bomber's height. Lieutenant Matsuo Yasui climbs with all his might in his Ki-61. Fighting to reach the enemy, his plane gets to 29,000 feet before stalling, still 2,000 feet below the bomber. Other interceptors do no better, with most not getting above 27,000 feet, even with perfect weather. The atomic blast happens while fighters fly around helplessly below, unable to stop it or even know the special kind of weapon it was. A similar failure happens on August 9th when Boxcar drops the second atomic weapon over Nagasaki. Japanese radar follows the bomber the whole way, giving plenty of warning for interception attempts. Many fighter squadrons take off but can't reach the B-29's height of 28,000 feet. The safety of technology allows for the use of strategic weapons without any chance of being stopped. After-war studies show the full size of the Japanese technology disadvantage against B-29 operations. The pressurization technology allowed for long flights above what Japanese interceptors could handle throughout the campaign. American crews worked well at heights where Japanese pilots could barely stay alive. Engine turbo supercharging kept power at heights where Japanese engines made less than half their listed output. The combined advantages were completely decisive in how well strategic bombing worked. Japanese pilots consistently showed great bravery and skill within the mechanical limits of their planes. A single person's determination could not overcome basic technology differences in equipment. High-altitude fighting needed engineering answers that were beyond what Japan's industry could do during the war. Shortages of materials, especially special steels and aluminum alloys, stopped the creation of competitive systems. The B-29 campaign proved the American investment in advanced bomber technology and industrial power was right. The success of strategic bombing depended on getting a safe zone through height advantage that no amount of enemy bravery could overcome. The Japanese defensive failures showed the importance of matching enemy technology in modern war. The campaign set the direction for post-war military airplane development around the world, creating standards that are still important today. General Korochika Anami looks at the home defense failures during the last military meetings before surrender. The B-29's height advantage completely canceled out Japan's geographical benefits and fighting spirit. Being technologically behind proved to be a problem that couldn't be solved, despite new tactics and pilot sacrifice. The understanding of being technologically beaten influenced the military's acceptance of unconditional surrender. Without the ability to defend against B-29s, continuing to fight was pointless. Former K-61 pilot, Lieutenant Naoshi Kano, remembers the desperate interception attempts in his post-war book. We climbed with everything our engines could give, watching the temperature gauges go into the red zone. My flight leader's engine caught fire at 28,000 feet. He bailed out while I kept climbing, getting to maybe 30,000 feet before my controls became completely useless. The B-29s passed overhead like silver ghosts, out of reach despite our most desperate efforts. The disappointment and shame of not being able to protect our homeland stayed with us more than the fear of death. B-29 crew member. Technical Sergeant Robert Johnson tells about seeing Japanese fighters from his central fire control spot. We could see them fighting to get up to us, tiny dots getting slowly bigger. Sometimes they'd get close enough that we could see details, the red circles on their wings, even the pilot's canopy. Then they'd stall and fall away, tumbling like leaves. A few managed to shoot at us, but their bullets usually fell short. It was almost sad watching them try so hard and fail. We had every advantage: height, speed, firepower, armor. They had nothing but courage. And courage wasn't enough against physics. Strategic Air Command took the lessons from B-29 operations and put them into its Cold War nuclear delivery plans. Flying high to get through became a basic rule for using strategic bombers against defended targets. Pressurization and supercharging technology moved forward quickly based on the combat experience over Japan. The tactical benefits shown against Japanese defenses shaped bomber development for decades, leading in time to jet-powered strategic bombers that flew at even greater heights. The Japanese airplane industry studied B-29 technology through captured planes and papers after the surrender. Engineers saw that several technology generations separated Japanese and American plane design ideas. Pressurization systems had complex sealing mechanisms and structural strengthening that were beyond what Japanese manufacturing could do. Turbo supercharging was a work of precision engineering that needed special materials and manufacturing standards not available in wartime Japan. Remote control defensive systems used analog computers more advanced than any Japanese military gear, using vacuum tubes and precision parts that Japan couldn't make. The technical study gave a serious look at what was needed in industrial development for modern airplane competition. Veteran B-29 pilot Colonel Paul Tibbets thinks back on the height advantage during the atomic missions. Flying above the enemy fighter's reach allowed for exact navigation to the target without worrying about defense. We knew Japanese fighters couldn't get to us, which let us focus completely on the mission. The safety of technology was absolute. They could see us, follow us on radar, but couldn't touch us. It was like being behind bulletproof glass. Their inability to stop us guaranteed the atomic missions would succeed, no matter how much early warning or preparation they had. Ki-84 pilot Captain Iwao Hayashi tells about trying to intercept B-29s in the war's last months. Even flying Japan's most advanced fighter, getting to the bomber's height was almost impossible. The engine would cough and sputter above 30,000 feet, barely making enough power to stay in the air. The controls became soft, like flying through molasses. We'd make one pass if we were lucky, firing a short burst before stalling. Watching them continue on unharmed while our cities burned below created a feeling of helplessness I'll never forget. Study of crashed. B-29s shows a sophisticated construction that was completely beyond what Japanese manufacturing could do. The pressurized cabin design had complex sealing systems using synthetic rubber materials Japan couldn't make. The structural strengthening for pressurization needed precision welding methods and quality control beyond Japanese standards. Remote turret control systems used analog computers with vacuum tube technology more advanced than any Japanese military gear. The servo mechanisms for gun control showed a level of precision manufacturing not available in Japanese industry. Even simple parts like electrical wiring used materials and insulation better than what Japan had. Major Toshio Sakagawa leads the 244th Sentai during the B-29 attacks, writing down the unit's combat experiences. My pilots were among Japan's best, with years of combat experience. Yet we did almost nothing against B-29s at their height. Our combat reports always tell the same story of failure. Climbing desperately, getting to maybe 28,000 or 29,000 feet, engines failing, controls not working, then watching helplessly as bombers passed over. The technological defeat was complete and humiliating. B-29. Bombardier Lieutenant Marcus McDilda sees Japanese fighter attempts during missions over Osaka. The Japanese pilots showed incredible resolve. We'd watch them climbing toward us for 15 or 20 minutes, struggling higher and higher. Some would try zoom climbs, giving up speed for height in desperate tries to reach us. They'd fire a few rounds, usually falling short, then stall and spin away. Our gunners rarely had to shoot. The height was better protection than any armor or weapons. It was a completely one-sided fight decided by technology, not courage. Japanese military attaché reports from Germany tell of the Luftwaffe's troubles stopping high-altitude Allied bombers, giving a background for Japan's struggles. Even with better engines and technology, German fighters had a hard time fighting bombers above 25,000 feet. Mi-262 jet fighters had some success because of speed and height performance that Japan didn't have. Japanese industry can't develop similar jet technology before the war ends. Despite knowing it's needed, attempts to copy German designs fail because of a lack of special materials and manufacturing skill. The technology gap can't be closed, given the limited resources and strategic bombing damage to industry. Colonel John Montgomery leads the 9th Bombardment Group missions from Tinian, watching how Japanese defenses change. At first, they tried mass interceptions, sending up everything that could fly. By spring 1945, they'd mostly given up on daylight high-altitude interceptions. They focused on night raids when we came in low with our planes. A smart change, but too late to make a difference. The height advantage we had for most of the campaign meant we could destroy their industry with almost no opposition. Maintenance. Officer Captain Hiroshi Fujiwara writes, down the constant problems with Japanese high-altitude. Fighter operations in technical reports. Engine failures went up sharply during maximum altitude attempts. The Ha-40 engine in Kai-61s would get too hot within minutes at full power above 25,000 feet. Oil pressure dropped, coolant boiled even with radiator changes. Oxygen system problems caused many pilot injuries, men passing out at height, some never waking up. Frostbite became common as pilots took off gloves to work the controls at extreme height. The buildup of mechanical failures made long, high-altitude operations impossible, no matter how determined the pilot was. B-29 Engineer Staff Sergeant James Pearson checks the pressurization systems during combat missions. The cabin height stayed at a comfortable 8,000-foot equivalent while we flew above 30,000. We worked in our shirt sleeves, moving freely between spots. Meanwhile, Japanese pilots were struggling with frozen controls, not enough oxygen, and engines that could barely work. The technology mismatch was total. It wasn't a fair fight. It was barely a fight at all. Japanese radar operator Corporal Shigeo Yamamoto tracks B-29 groups coming in at a height never seen before. Our equipment could follow them from hundreds of miles away, giving our fighters plenty of warning. But warning meant nothing when our planes couldn't get to the bombing height. I'd guide fighters toward intercept points, knowing they'd fail. Pilots would report the highest they got, usually 27,000 or 28,000 feet, then watch bombers pass overhead at 31,000. The disappointment in their voices was heartbreaking. We had the will, but not the way. Final Japanese military reports admit a complete failure in defending against B-29 high-altitude operations. Despite geographical advantages, warrior spirit, and early warning systems, being technologically behind stopped an effective defense of the homeland. The limits of industrial power made matching American bomber technology impossible during the war. The understanding of being technologically beaten influenced military support for surrender talks, admitting that continuing to fight could not stop Japan's destruction from the air. Lieutenant Kunihiro Tanaka flies a final interception mission on August 14, 1945, against a reconnaissance B-29 taking pictures of damage. His Ki-100 fighter gets to 28,000 feet before losing engine power, forcing him to come down, which was typical of hundreds of failed interceptions. The photo reconnaissance plane goes on unharmed at 35,000 feet, recording atomic bomb damage for American intelligence. The mission is a symbol of the ongoing technological inability to stop American strategic air superiority, even in the war's last hours. B-29 radio operator Sergeant William Odell listens to Japanese fighter control channels during missions, giving a look into the enemy's frustration. We could hear their ground controllers guiding fighters toward us, giving height and direction information. Then the pilots would report they couldn't climb any higher, engines getting too hot, losing power. Sometimes you'd hear anger, sometimes acceptance. They knew where we were, knew what we were doing, but couldn't stop us. Technology decided everything. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey does a detailed study of how well Japanese fighters did against B-29 operations. High-altitude daylight raids had very few losses to fighter interception throughout the campaign. About 50 B-29s were lost to fighters out of over 30,000 individual flights, a loss rate of less than 0.2%. Japanese fighters were only effective when B-29s flew at a lower height because of mechanical problems or tactical needs. The numbers prove how effective the safety of height was against the interceptor technology of the time. Former Imperial Japanese Navy Commander Masatake Okumiya looks at the strategic bombing defense failures in a post-war study. The B-29's height ability was at least 5,000 feet more than what our intelligence thought. We expected them to fly at a top height of around 26,000 feet based on B-17 and B-24 performance. When they regularly flew above 30,000 feet, our whole defensive plan fell apart. We didn't have the time, resources, or technology to create effective ways to fight back. B-29 pilot Colonel Robert Robbins tells about the mental advantage of the safety of height. Knowing enemy fighters couldn't reach us changed everything. We flew straight and level to targets. No dodging was needed. Bombardiers had stable platforms for accurate aiming. Crews stayed calm, knowing the main danger came from mechanical problems, not enemy action. The confidence boost was huge. We owned the sky above 30,000 feet and everyone knew it. Ki-44 veteran Captain Yoshiro Aoyagi remembers watching B-29 vapor trails out of reach. Each mission brought the same feeling of shame. We'd climb until our engines gave out, get to maybe one-third of the height we needed, then watch silver vapor trails drawing lines across our sky. The old warrior spirit meant nothing against aluminum and engineering. We were samurai with swords trying to reach the moon. The mental effect destroyed morale more than combat losses ever could. General Henry Arnold assesses the B-29 program's success despite the huge development costs, which were more than the Manhattan Project. The strategic bombing campaign proved every dollar spent on advanced technology was worth it. The safety of height allowed for precision attacks and the delivery of atomic weapons without terrible losses. We proved that technological superiority could decide a victory without huge ground invasions. The investment in pressurization, supercharging, and defensive systems paid off in ways that shaped military aviation for decades. Japanese aircraft designer Takeo Doi studies the Ki-61's weaknesses against B-29 operations. Our fighter was built for combat between 15,000 and 25,000 feet, where most air combat happened. We never expected bombers to fly regularly above 30,000 feet. Changing the existing designs was impossible. The engine, airframe, and systems were just not good enough for extreme height. Starting over would take years we didn't have and resources that were no longer there. Squadron leader Major Teruhiko Kobayashi's 244th Sentai had over 100 victories against American planes, but very little success against B-29s. My pilots included many aces with years of experience against fighters and medium bombers. We were still competitive, but B-29s at that height might as well have been on another planet. Skill didn't matter when your plane physically can't reach the enemy. We watched our homeland burn while we had the will, but not the way to defend it. B-29. Navigator Lieutenant Thomas Cartwright tells about the navigation benefits of pressurized flights. Working at height without oxygen masks or heavy gloves meant we could do precise chart work and math. We could use all our instruments well, talk clearly, and move between spots as needed. Japanese navigators in unpressurized fighters dealt with foggy goggles, frozen instruments, and a lack of oxygen that affected their judgment. Our technological advantages increased our effectiveness in ways beyond just height. Japanese anti-aircraft artillery commander Colonel Hiroshi Yamamoto writes about the pointlessness of ground-based defenses. Our biggest guns could in theory reach 30,000 feet, but accuracy at that height was nearly impossible. The way shells spread out meant hitting anything took incredible luck. We fired thousands of rounds for every bomber shot down, using up ammunition without any real effect. The B-29s flew above our effective ground defense, protected by height as well as any armor. Maintenance problems troubled Japanese high-altitude operations throughout the campaign. Engines needed a full overhaul after just a few maximum altitude attempts because of too much stress. Supercharger systems broke down often, and replacement parts were harder and harder to find. Oxygen systems needed constant upkeep and suffered from a short supply of oxygen bottles and calcium hydroxide for CO2 removal. The mechanical wear and tear reduced the number of available interceptors no matter what the combat losses were, creating a downward spiral of ability. B-29 tail gunner Sergeant Robert Goldsborough watches Japanese fighter attempts from his lone position. From the tail, I had the best view of Japanese fighters trying to reach us. They'd show up as dots, slowly getting bigger as they climbed. Some would shoot from very far away, their tracers arching up but falling short. Others would try zoom climbs, giving up all their speed for height. They'd hang still for a moment, almost reaching us, then stall and tumble away. I rarely fired. They never got close enough to be a real danger. The technology mismatch goes beyond just height to every part of air warfare. B-29s carried advanced navigation gear, including radar and radio navigation tools not available to Japanese forces. Communication systems allowed for coordinated flights across hundreds of miles, while Japanese radios often failed. Even basic gear like heated flight suits and optical gun sights showed American industrial strength. Japanese industrial mobilization cannot match American production ability, despite desperate efforts. B-29 manufacturing used precision methods and quality control beyond what Japan could do. Assembly line production made it possible to save money in ways that were impossible with Japan's smaller-scale methods. America produced nearly 4,000 B-29s, while Japan struggled to make hundreds of weaker fighters. Attempts to copy captured equipment fail because of limits in materials science. Japan doesn't have access to special alloys, synthetic materials, and precision manufacturing tools needed for advanced aviation technology. The industrial technology gap proves impossible to close given wartime limits and the availability of resources. Lieutenant Commander Masahiko Kawato leads special attack units against B-29 groups over Nagoya. We changed our tactics all the time, trying everything we could think of. Night attacks, dawn interceptions, coordinated ramming attempts. Nothing worked consistently. The B-29s adapted faster than we could, changing heights, routes, and tactics. When we finally created methods for night interception, they switched back to high-altitude daylight raids we couldn't reach. They held every advantage while we only had determination. Boeing engineers designed the B-29 specifically for the strategic bombing needs of the Pacific Theater against Japan. Extended range allows for flights from far-off bases beyond the reach of enemy interception. Pressurization allows for regular flights at heights above enemy interceptor performance. Defensive systems give protection without losing performance. The design idea puts technological advantage over traditional bomber traits, creating a weapon system rather than just an airplane. Post-war airplane development uses the lessons from B-29 operations a great deal. Pressurization becomes standard for commercial airplanes, taken directly from military technology. Turbo supercharging makes regular high-altitude flight possible for all types of planes. Remote control systems develop into modern fly-by-wire technology. The technological new ideas change aviation beyond military uses, laying the groundwork for the modern aerospace industry. Captain Kazuo Tsunoda commands a Ki-84 squadron during the final Homeland defense operations. Japan's most advanced fighter meant nothing against B-29s at their height. Below 25,000 feet, we could fight well. Above that, we were helpless. Pilots would come back from missions feeling defeated, having never fired a shot. The mental damage was worse than our aircraft losses. We knew we were beaten technologically, which meant we were beaten completely. The B-29 operations proved the American strategic bombing plan right through a show of technological superiority. The safety of height allows for the regular destruction of Japanese military-industrial power without terrible losses. Strategic effects lead to a decision without an invasion, proving air power theories right. The delivery of atomic weapons succeeds because they are safe from interception at their flying height. The campaign proves the decisive use of air power through technological advantage rather than numbers, setting a model for Cold War deterrence strategy. The Japanese military leadership understands what technological defeat means for continuing the war. The inability to defend against B-29s shows a wider technological weakness across all military abilities. Industrial power can't match American production while being continuously damaged by strategic bombing. This growing realization influences Emperor Hirohito's decision to accept unconditional surrender, as there was no way to stop the aerial destruction of Japan. Continuing to fight becomes a pointless sacrifice. Veteran B-29 crew, Chief Master Sergeant Frank Morrison, keeps the plane's systems running throughout the Pacific campaign. The pressurization gear was complex but dependable when properly taken care of. Turbo superchargers needed careful attention, but gave us power at heights where Japanese engines wheezed. Every system was the result of years of engineering work and industrial ability that Japan just didn't have. We won through technology and industrial might, not just courage. Former Ki-61 pilot Lieutenant Jiro Tanaka survived several unsuccessful B-29 interception attempts. Each mission took the most physical effort to fight the effects of height. Breathing became hard even with oxygen. Hands went numb from the cold. Eyes watered constantly from the dry air and cold. Then watching bombers go on unopposed while our cities burned created a mental pain beyond combat stress. We felt we had failed our ancestors, our emperor, our people, not because we didn't try, but because of a technological inability. American industrial mobilization produces amounts and qualities of equipment beyond what the Japanese could imagine. The B-29 program alone costs more than Japan's entire military aviation budget for the whole war. Mass production saves money in ways that are impossible for Japanese manufacturing methods. Precision tools and quality control make sure of consistent performance that isn't available from Japanese industry. The industrial difference adds to the technological advantages throughout the strategic bombing campaign. General Curtis LeMay's tactical new ideas make the most of the B-29's advantages against Japanese defenses. Low-altitude night raids give up the height advantage but use other technological superiorities. Radar bombing, firebomb weapons, and mass groups overwhelm Japanese abilities no matter the height. The ability to change tactics while keeping a technological superiority proves decisive. Japanese adaptation can't overcome basic disadvantages in equipment and industrial power. The B-29 campaign changes the understanding of how to use strategic air power. Technology makes possible effects that used to need huge ground forces. Industrial power becomes as important as military strategy in modern war. The model set influence military planning through the Cold War and beyond. Nuclear deterrence strategies build directly on the B-29's operational experience over Japan. This full look at Japanese fighter operations against B-29 raids shows that technology plays an absolutely decisive role in modern warfare. Despite amazing courage, new tactics, and desperate sacrifice, Japanese pilots could not overcome basic technological limits. The safe zone provided by pressurization and turbo supercharging created an advantage that couldn't be beaten. When joined with America's industrial power for the mass production of complex weapons systems, the technology gap proved impossible to close. The B-29's operational superiority over Japan proved the American investment in advanced aviation technology right, showing for sure that in modern warfare, technological advantage can be more decisive than the traditional military values of courage, skill, and determination. The campaign's result was decided in American factories and engineering offices as much as in the skies over Japan, setting models that would shape military airplane development for generations to come.